Hello, so today I've decided to do my presentation on the chemistry of biology, and this is chapter 2. And the reason that I decided to do this is because it helps you to grasp an understanding of how things work on a molecular level and helps you understand the building blocks of life. Okay, starting off, this is called the building blocks, and I wanted to simplify it as much as possible. The universe carries a variety of substances found in the liquid, gaseous, and solid states. Anything that occupies space and has mass is called matter. So this could either be in a solid, liquid, or gaseous state. And even if you cannot see the particles in the gaseous state, does not mean that they do not carry mass. There are three main building blocks that form matter, which are the following. Atoms, which are one of the smallest formations in the universe, and they cannot be subdivided. Molecule, this is a combination of two or more atoms, and bonds. A chemical bond occurs when two or more atoms join together, ultimately forming a molecule. So each one of these, they kind of build off one another, and without one another, they couldn't exist. Okay, so starting off with atoms, I want to kind of simplify this a little bit. Atoms are composed of three essentials: protons, which are positively charged, neutrons, which are neutrally charged, and electrons, which are negatively charged. The center of the atom, also known as the nucleus, consists of protons and neutrons that are larger in sizing. In the outer ring, one or more electrons surround the nucleus. The atom itself is held together by opposite electrical charges. So in order for something to attract, they have to be opposite charges. So there's going to be a picture in the next slide that kind of represents this illustration. Okay, so here's an illustration of this atom. As you can see, you have your protons in the middle, you have your neutrons with your protons in the nucleus, sorry, not the middle, and the electrons are in the cloud that circle this nucleus. And the mass in the atom is from the nucleus. And then the electron shell holds its volume. So to kind of grasp an understanding of this, I found a fun fact. If you were to observe a baseball stadium, the nucleus would be the size of a marble. So that kind of puts it in perspective of how big this electron cloud is. And I think that's pretty interesting. Okay, so building upon the atom, once you understand what an atom is, you can understand elements. So structurally, all atoms are similar. However, when protons, neutrons, and electrons form in a variety of combinations, then they become their own unique element. So I put carbon as an example, and as you can see, it has 6 electrons, 6 protons, and 6 neutrons. So this atom right here is its own unique formation. If it had different numbers of electrons or different number of protons or neutrons, then it wouldn't make it its own unique creation. So reading the atomical structure corresponding with the periodic table. So this is carbon again, and mass number equals the number of protons and neutrons together. So you have 6 protons and 6 neutrons, so it equals 12 for its mass number. And then the number of protons equals its atomic number, which is 6. So 6 protons, and it gives it its atomical number, which is 6. Okay, so moving on, you have your isotopes. They are forms of the same elements, although isotopes are those that vary in the number of neutrons. So, occurring naturally, they can form in different proportions. Carbon is mainly known as carbon-12, consisting of 6 neutrons. However, in some rare cases, which is 1%, I thought that was interesting, it can occur as carbon-13 with 7 neutrons or carbon-14 with 8 neutrons. So I thought this was pretty interesting, is why I added it. It says small changes such as these can drastically affect the element. When the nuclei is unstable, it can result in spontaneous energy releases in the form of radiation. So these isotopes, they can be used in scientific experimentations. So, fun fact, isotopes have been studied to exist from the beginning of time. They help trace the studies of past organisms, even space exploration. Okay, so the electrons' orbital shells. In an atom, the electrons are figured to be found in a pattern, the orbit around the shell. In the different layers of the orbital, the number of electrons vary. So I put the numbers here. In the first shell, you have one orbit with a max of 2 electrons. Second shell, 4 orbitals, max of 8 electrons. Third shell, 9 orbitals, max of 18 electrons. And the fourth shell, 16 orbitals, max of 32 electrons. So the element's number of shells and orbitals are manipulated from the existing electrons. So, if you had more electrons, then that would equal more orbitals. If we had less electrons, that would equal less orbitals. Okay, so we're moving on to molecules. So while elements can only consist of one type of atom, molecules can have one type of atom or more than one type of atom. Oxygen have multiple atoms of the same element. So on oxygen it's represented as O2, so it'd be 2 oxygen atoms bound together. Building further, compounds are molecules that are combinations of 2 or more different elements. Water is a basic compound. Sugars, fats, and proteins are biological molecules that are found in living systems. Atoms lose their property when they are bound together in molecules, acquiring the properties of the combined substance. Okay, so I added this illustration here with the water molecule because I think it's a really basic molecule to help you understand the compound. So you have your oxygen and you have your 2 hydrogens, and the oxygen has a slight negative charge while the hydrogen have a slight positive charge, and they pull each other together based on these opposite charges. So I thought that was pretty interesting to see. Okay, moving on, you have your chemical bonds. And these molecules are held together by chemical bonds. So without these chemical bonds, you cannot have molecules. These bonds occur when atoms share, donate, or lose electrons. The valence is the number of electrons in the outermost shell. The valence holds significance in the molecule because it determines the reactivity and the bonds. For example, the element nitrogen has stable reactivity because of the triple bonds between its atoms. Okay, so a different type of bond, you have your covalent bond. Unlike losing or receiving electrons, molecules that are in a covalent bond share them. Hydrogen is a good example. When a singular hydrogen bonds with another, they share electrons, resulting in stability. So I added some pictures here to help you understand, but you have your single hydrogen atom, and if they bind together, as you can see, they are sharing them. So each one has 1 electron, and together they form 2. And here's another example, and that is pretty cool. Okay, double covalent bonds. So in double covalent bonding, 2 atoms share 2 electron pairs. Oxygen is a good example. So I added a picture here. As you can see, these 2 electrons, these 2 pairs of electrons, they bind together. Okay, so electronegativity and polarity. The attractions of electrons is electronegativity. Atoms with varying electronegativity and covalent bonding can result in uneven sharing, and some atoms can pull in different ways. Uneven dispersal of charges becomes polar. Water is a good example of polarity. Oxygen being larger, it has more protons and draws electrons toward its nucleus. The uneven distribution causes oxygen to have a positive charge and hydrogens to have a negative charge. So I talked about that earlier, but that's a pretty good example to help you understand. Okay, so opposite from your polar, you have your nonpolar. Similarities in electronegativities and covalent bonding have distributive comparability. The molecule is balanced and no uneven attraction, which means it is nonpolar. It's the opposite of polar. So I put here this illustration. It kind of talks about it. You have your polar, and as you can see, your water is polar, and methane, which is nonpolar, carbon dioxide, which is nonpolar. Okay, so another bonding would be your ionic bonds. Apart from sharing electrons like in covalent bonding, in ionic bonding, electrons transfer from each atom to another. For instance, if an atom that has an unfilled shell that is available to lose the electrons, then another atom has an unfilled shell available to gain the electrons. So they have a relationship there. An example of this bonding is common table salt. So as you can see, the charges are opposite, which means they're going to attract one another. Okay, so here are some more pictures. Helps you understand. You have your sodium atom and you have your chlorine atom. And as you can see, their opposite charges allow them to attract one another. And I like this one because it helps you understand how they donate their electrons. So in your sodium, it donates an electron to your chlorine atom. Okay, so cations and anions. Cations are ions that have a positive charge, whereas anions are ions that have a negative charge. Because of the opposite charges, it allows them to attract one another. So as stated before, if they have similar charges, they're going to repel, but if they have opposite, they're going to attract. Okay, so next you have ionization. Charged particles can be released when molecules with ionic bonds are dissolved in a solvent. A solvent allows substances to be dissolved. During this process, atoms separate from their ionic bonds. These particles receive their names ions. When they are unattached, they become charged. Okay, so next you have your electrolytes. So when bases, acids, and salts are dissolved in water, they become electrolytes. They help maintain electrical charges in cells. Electrons transferring from one molecule to another allows the storage and release of energy. So without electrolytes, you become seriously dehydrated. They're one of the main things that you need to survive, and they're very important. Okay, so another type of bonding, you have your hydrogen bonding. This type of bonding is different from the rest because it does not involve sharing, losing, or gaining electrons. What happens in this reaction is the electrons are attracted to nearby molecules or atoms. Hydrogen bonding is said to be weak because of the slightly positive charge of hydrogen and its attraction to negative charges. One example is the bond between water molecules. So, although these attractions are weak, one positive aspect about it is its flexibility. Okay, so here's another attraction. These are called van der Waals forces. Occurring between molecules with low levels of polarity, only groups with slight attractions will remain together. With a large molecule containing packed atoms, these bonds are essential to their function. So, although the hydrogen and van der Waals forces are weak on their own, I stated this before, the great number of them provide stability and flexibility to molecules. So they are very much needed. But here you can see the van der Waals forces example. Okay, so next you have your superstructures of life. Biochemistry is the study of chemical compounds of life. Smaller subunits of carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids are macromolecules. Formed by polymerization, these monomers are bound into chains of various lengths, given the name polymers. Okay, so next you have your carbohydrates. These structures come in a wide variety, but are combinations of carbon and water. They are linked by glycosidic bonds, resembling a chain. So I'll put a picture here. So next you have your lipids. These are fats, phospholipids, and waxes. Lipid is the term for fats that are not soluble in polar solvents, but nonpolar. Some lipids are triglycerides, phospholipids, waxes, and steroids. Okay, so I just put a picture here. As you can see, all the chains of lipids. It kind of speaks for itself. Okay, so proteins. They are also known as the shapers of life. They are varied, and they do not operate in a chain of amino acids. Structure of organization. You have your primary, which is your order, type, and number of amino acids in a chain. your secondary, which your hydrogen bonds are formed by functional groups on the surface of the molecule that interact, and tertiary, additional bonds between the functional groups. Okay, now, once everything comes to life, it forms your cells. So, all cells have similar characteristics, and I have an example in the next slide. Okay, so here you have your different type of cells. These are plant and animal cells, and as you can see, they kind of are different in their shapes, but for the most part, they definitely have some shared characteristics.